Zaldin. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
Never-ending security threats. Those were the final words that U.S. Ambassador to Libya, Christopher Stevens, wrote in his diary on September 11, 2012. Later that day, he was killed in an assault on the U.S. diplomatic mission and a more fortified CIA compound in the Libyan city of Benghazi. 3 other Americans were killed in the attack: State Department computer specialist Sean Smith and 2 former Navy SEALs, Glenn Doherty and Tyrone Woods, who were working as contractors with the CIA. In another entry in his diary, Stevens wrote, quote, "Islamist hit list in Benghazi, me targeted." Last week, 7 pages of Ambassador Stevens' diary were published by the website sofrep.com, a site that covers U.S. special operations. Ambassador Stevens was reportedly the first American envoy to be killed abroad in more than 2 decades. Many questions remain unanswered about what happened on that night in Benghazi. The White House initially said the consulate was attacked by protesters denouncing a short American film insulting the Prophet Muhammad, but it later turned out the attack was carried out by well-armed militants. Meanwhile, Republicans have accused the White House of covering up failures to protect the consulate. In December, an independent panel probing the incident found, quote, "systemic failures and leadership and management deficiencies at senior levels within 2 State Department bureaus, resulting in security that was, quote, inadequate for Benghazi and grossly inadequate to deal with the attack that took place." Panel Vice Chair Admiral Mike Mullen unveiled the report's conclusions.
The board found that the attacks in Benghazi were security-related, and responsibility for the loss of life, the injuries, and damage to U.S. facilities rests completely and solely with the terrorists who conducted the attacks. That does not mean there are not lessons to be learned. The board found that the security posture at the Special Mission Compound was inadequate for the threat environment in Benghazi, and in fact grossly inadequate to deal with the attack that took place that night.
The State Department's head of security resigned and 3 other officials were dismissed in the wake of an inquiry's findings about security failures. But another issue has seldom been raised in regards to Benghazi: blowback. According to a recent book written by 2 former Special Ops members, the Benghazi attack was in part blowback from a secret war waged by JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, targeting al-Qaeda-aligned militant groups in Libya and North Africa. According to the book, President Obama's counterterrorism advisor, John Brennan, and JSOC Commander Admiral Bill McRaven were running off-the-books unilateral operations in North Africa that were not coordinated through the Pentagon or other governmental agencies, including the CIA. Ambassador Stevens was reportedly never informed about these operations. The e-book Benghazi, the definitive report, was written by Jack Murphy and Brandon Webb, who also run the website sofrep.com that published Ambassador Stevens' diary. Brandon Webb is a former U.S. Navy SEAL with combat deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. He was a course manager for the U.S. Navy SEAL sniper program. His best friend, Glenn Doherty, died in the Benghazi attack. Jack Murphy served as an airborne ranger and special forces sergeant in Iraq and Afghanistan. Brandon Webb and Jack Murphy, we welcome you both to Democracy Now! For the rest of this hour. In the right-wing media, there is a lot of discussion about the lack of security, and clearly there was a lack of security in Benghazi. But what isn't discussed as much is what led up to these attacks, is the blowback. And Jack Murphy, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. Well, there's a number of different contributing factors that led to these attacks. When we start to talk about the blowback effect, we do also have to understand that this was a group of people, the Ansar al-Sharia militia, that wasn't particularly fond of Americans to begin with. There was a large number of foreign fighters, these international jihadists, who were amongst that group the night of the attack. But what hasn't been talked about very much in the media is that there were covert operations being run inside Libya, targeted killings against militia members, al-Qaeda-affiliated personnel, also involving securing weapons that had fallen into the militia hands that we didn't want them to have in the post-war Libya that was destabilizing the Libyan transitional government. But there were a series of operations over the course of the summer and even that first week of September in the run-up to the attack.
U.S. government allies were also assassinated, were killed.
You're talking about the British embassy that was
No,
attacked?
I was talking about what so angered the Libyans as we were moving into September 11th of that year.
Right. Well, allegedly, there was even a CIA asset that was targeted and killed in that first week of September prior to the attack.
By who? Killed by?
By the United States military, by special operations personnel.
A CIA asset killed by U.S. personnel.
Allegedly. And this phenomena has happened previously in Iraq and Afghanistan. I don't know if I'll ever be able to prove for certain that this individual was an asset, but you can only imagine what's going through the heads of the militia members as they feel that they're working hand in hand with the Americans, and then all of a sudden the Americans kill one of their people. And this was definitely one of the events that led to the Special Operations Forces actually kicking up the hornet's nest in Libya, and it was a contributing factor that led to the attack in Benghazi.
But could you explain what, for people who don't know, JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, who do they fall under, and who's responsible for what it is they do in these covert operations? Who gives the directives? Who was aware of what was going on in Libya at the time of these covert operations, and who was not aware?
Well, it's interesting, a number of executive findings that have been issued out in the last, since 9/11, really, which today you have a situation in which not only does the ambassador of the country being operated in not have knowledge of the operations, but also the chief of station of the CIA doesn't have knowledge of these operations. And this isn't the first time it's happened. It happened in 2004 in Kenya, where a number of operators actually got popped going through customs. So these sorts of situations, there was an expediter that was helping them through customs, and through one manner or another, the entire team got compromised. And the ambassador had to step in at that point, who was unaware of this operation that was taking place, had to step in and basically hand out the get out of jail free cards and get them back home. So all these things have happened. They've been happening for a long time now.
The role of John Brennan?
John Brennan had an interesting position at the time of the Benghazi attacks, in that, his first attempt to become the director of the CIA didn't happen, but he managed to become the counterterrorism advisor for President Obama, which put him in this interesting position that he had quite a bit of influence, but he also fell under executive privilege. It wasn't exactly the same legal status that he would have had as the director of the CIA that he has now. So John Brennan and Admiral McRaven were actually running operations all over the Middle East and North Africa. Pretty much they had free rein to run those operations as they wanted from the executive office.
Well, I want to turn to Ambassador Stevens' diary. On September 6, Stevens wrote about the transition of authority that had occurred in the aftermath of the Libyan civil war, and commented on how shaky the country felt after the Gaddafi regime fell. He wrote, quote, "Militias, the prime power on the ground, weak state security institutions, as a result, dicey conditions." Stevens went on to write, quote, "Islamist hit list in Benghazi, me targeted." On September 9th, Stevens acknowledged that he felt overwhelmed. He wrote, quote, "Stressful day, too many things going on, everyone wants to bend my ear, need to pull above the fray." The final entry on September 11th is extremely chilling. Stevens writes simply, quote, "Never-ending security threats." So, Brandon Webb, I'd like to ask you, first of all, what most surprised you in what you found in Ambassador Stevens' diary, and the work that you did in reproducing the bits that you did on your website?
Sure. So, I think what we were surprised to see, or what put to rest a lot of questions that Jack and I had previously, was Ambassador Stevens aware of what was happening inside the country with regards to what the CIA was doing, what JSOC was doing. I think clearly from the diary, he was not aware of what was happening. And again, it put to rest a lot of speculation about what Ambassador Stevens' final thoughts were in the last couple of days leading up to his death, and you see the writing in his own words. So I think it puts to rest a lot of speculation, and also shows that he was very concerned about the security situation, but also very hopeful with the transitional government in Libya. And I just think it's a tragedy. And why I think Libya is important, and what we've tried to show in our work on Benghazi and the book Jack and I wrote, was that we're looking at over a decade of failed U.S. foreign policy, and it's not it doesn't have to do with the right wing or the left wing. It really it's across both administrations, and when you have different elements operating, whether it's Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Mali, and
you've been in Iraq and Afghanistan, both of you.
Yeah, and you don't have these different agencies talking to each other on the different sheets of music, and how can we hope to accomplish objectives when we're literally, people are cooperating with the CIA, and then JSOC is assassinating these same assets a few days later. So it's just a messy situation, and if our foreign policy was working in the world, we'd have a much more stable world today.
Do you think that it was in Libya that I mean, in other words, was this situation unprecedented, or is it often the case that security agencies, U.S. security agencies operating abroad, don't necessarily share information with diplomatic missions?
It's the latter, and that's what we've tried to show is important, and that we've highlighted in Libya. Like, here's a clear example of what's going wrong with what we're doing in the world. I think Jack and I both believe in the special operations community, and that you need certain tools to deal with a lot of bad people out there. But when you have no clear strategic objective, and you can just look at what we've accomplished in Afghanistan, and what have we really done in over a decade in Afghanistan, and what you ask anybody on the street or in the White House what our ultimate objective was in Afghanistan, and you're going to get a different answer. And I've asked those questions before.
Jack Murphy, what about the role of General Petraeus, who was taken down in a sex scandal? Do you think that's really why he was taken down?
No. There's a number of interesting aspects of what happened with General Petraeus. After Benghazi, he realized that he was the perpetual outsider in the administration. He was actually preparing to step down and interviewing for the job to be the president of Princeton University. What had happened was that when this started to happen, when he started to make motions that he was going to leave the CIA and step down, was that the government, CIA insiders, and other people inside the government contrived a situation in which he was forced out of the administration in a way that was politically disgraceful, that would knock him out of the political game for years to come. And that's pretty much what happened, was that there were people on the 7th floor of the CIA, managers and officers, who already didn't like Petraeus for throwing his weight around, acting like he was a 4-star general, and for further pursuing paramilitary programs that they didn't like. So there were personnel within that then contrived a legal situation and instigated a legal investigation with the FBI to find the information that his bodyguards, that the people close to him, already knew existed. Everybody knew about Paula Broadwell. That was not a secret at all.
Paula Broadwell being?
Right, a mistress. That wasn't a secret.
Who wrote a book about him.
So they contrived this legal situation to find the information that they already knew existed. And then I'm told that there was a very interesting meeting between General Petraeus and John Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence. And there were some harsh words thrown out during that meeting, because that was when it was revealed, when it was told to General Petraeus that he would be stepping down because his affair would be exposed.
We're going to have to break, and then we're going to come back to this discussion. Our guests are Jack Murphy and Brandon Webb. They're editors of SOFREP.com, and they've written a book called Benghazi, the definitive report. Jack Murphy, Army Special Operations veteran; Brandon Webb, U.S. Navy SEAL veteran.